think one of the biggest mistakes we make as human beings is I assume I know why you're doing that, or I assume I know exactly what you mean by that.
I'm Susan Goss, and as a seasoned therapist of more than 15 years, I'm honored to have had the opportunity to gain so much wisdom from so many people and love passing that knowledge on to others. So join me and some of my favorite friends as we share some tangible truths with you.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Tangible Truth Podcast. We're so glad you joined us. And well, we've had Ryan Rayna join me the last, 3 weeks and talking about favorite phrases of therapists. And we hope that that has helped our listeners, you. And today I have got Brad Franklin joining me, and he is a colleague of mine. He is the president of Fresh Roots Family Counseling here in Rogers. Brad is a board member on Tangible Truth Ministries board. I am thrilled to have him with us here on Tangible Truth Podcast. Hey, Brad.
How are you, Susan?
Well, fine. And how many years have you been a therapist?
33.
Did I hear you go 30?
I can't believe it's been that long, but it's been a little hot minute here.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
And Brad mainly sees couples. He sees some individuals every once in a while, but mainly couples therapy. He's like me. We love seeing couples, and you actually have to be called in love to see couples. Couples are the most chaotic, I would say, but I say that in saying, when more people are in the room, it just gets more chaotic, but we love it. And so not everybody sees couples, but we do, but we see individuals every once in a while, but we do love our couples, and it's hard work, but it's very rewarding. And we're both system therapists. And what that means is we are going to be talking about, I'm going to kind of talk both at the same time. We're going to be talking about a phrase, what makes this make sense, which in systems therapy you use all the time, because the phrase came from the grandfather of systems therapists called Harry Stack Sullivan, and he brought that to systems therapy. In systems, what you do is you are always asking what makes that make sense. It's a longer process of therapy. It's different than linear therapy. Linear is more A causes B, when you say, Brad.
Right.
And systems therapy, it's a process of getting to the bottom of what makes that make sense. If you're eating 13 donuts, why are you eating 13 donuts? It's not like stop eating 13 donuts and stop driving by Krispy Kreme. I'm making a joke about that, and I shouldn't be, but it's more of a process of getting to the root of issues of why somebody would eat 13 donuts at one time.
Well, and systems theory also understands that we're a product of a lot of different influences, right?
Lots.
It's not just the fact I love donuts or I live close to Krispy Kreme, that there are a lot of people and experiences that feed into who I am today and why I do what I do.
We do a lot of family of origin work. We do what we call a genogram, which is a history of your family. And because we're all a product of how we were raised, right? And so we do a lot of that kind of work, and we do a lot of different things, approaches to getting to the root of what causes issues in our lives. So that is Harry Stack Sullivan, and who gave us this phrase that we're going to be talking about today. I say this phrase every single day of my life. It's like that circle talk. What's in my circle? Okay, it's right up there with that. I say, what makes this make sense? That phrase, what makes this make sense? Every single day in therapy, in session, I say that. When you sit with someone long enough, as you well know, Brad, everything does always make sense. When you sit with a client long enough, sit with a couple, a family, individual, it does make sense. When you're trusting God, trusting the process of therapy, things do make sense. They're not quick fixes. It takes you out of judgment when you're sitting with someone, when you're trying to figure out what makes this make sense. Somebody will say, ooh, they're acting horrible, or whatever. But it's our job to put that in a box and make sense of that. This is not a word, horribleness, where it takes it. It's our job. What would make sense that they're acting that way?
And Susan, recognizing making sense doesn't mean it's logical. It doesn't even mean it's working in their life, but it makes sense within the context of where they're coming from.
Oh, what an excellent point, Brad. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. No, and as you and I know, it's not doing them well in their life. And that's why generally they're in therapy. Yeah. It's not working in their life, but we need to make sense why they're so angry, why they're frustrated, why they are lashing out. We need to help them make sense of that and get to the bottom of it. And I've got a great illustration of how I learned the phrase.
How'd you learn that phrase, Susan?
It's kind of graphic.
I'm ready.
Well, you've heard it. Should I share it?
I think you should. It makes the point.
It does make the point, and it's very vivid. So, listeners, it is graphic, but I feel like you need to hear it because I want to tell you, I learned it years and years ago, and I still have the picture in my mind, and it really painted the picture for me, and I've never forgotten the phrase, what makes this make sense, and learned it then. But it was with Ryan. Ryan gave me this illustration, and man, did it make the point. That's when he was presenting Harry Stack Sullivan, learning the phrase, what makes this make sense, and gave the story of a young man in a psychiatric ward who every night he would smear feces all over his body, and no one could figure out why he would do that. They were very perplexed by that. Come to find out, he started doing that because he had been sexually abused in the psychiatric ward, and so he found a way to protect himself by doing that. And that made that make sense. And I thought, there's the phrase, what makes that make sense? When you sat with someone long enough to figure that out, that was self-protection for him.
Meaning if he smeared the feces on himself, he would not be attacked.
He would not be attacked. Yeah. And that made that make sense. Doesn't that paint a picture?
It does.
Of that. It's a horrible example, but a perfect example of that phrase.
Behavior that looks so crazy, but in context, the behavior makes sense.
100%.
Yeah.
And so that's what you and I do every day.
It is.
All behavior communicates something to us. And so that is what we do in session. We look, and all behavior communicates. That behavior communicated something, and we had to make sense of it. And so I thought that painted such a vivid picture of that phrase, what makes this make sense?
Absolutely.
So what about you and your practice as it relates to that
Yeah, Susan, one thing I have had to learn, I work mainly with couples, and you get two people in the room, and one of them is going to make more sense to me than the other one, either because we're both male or because we have a personality that's similar. And as you know, in doing the same kind of work, good marriage therapy, you have to hold both people equally, meaning they both have to have a position with you that they are being heard, that they are being taken serious, that we are curious as to what's going on with them and not just assume we know what that means, right? And so, part of why I use this, and I don't say it out loud as much as probably you do, but I'm thinking it every day, is like, why does this make sense? To your point, why is this person so angry? Or why are they so passive aggressive? Or why are they the very thing that they say they want, they are refusing to let happen? So why would that make sense? And coming to understand that a lot of times people are even blind to what they're doing, is they don't even know why they're doing that. But if you look at the situation, if you hear the story, you begin connecting the dots, you begin to see that behavior has a purpose, or that reaction has a purpose. And once again, it doesn't necessarily need to be logical. It's not necessarily even working well from them. That's beside the point. It doesn't make it right, but it makes sense. And if you can ever get to that point and someone be heard and be seen, that begins to turn the corner into health, into something better.
100%. And I use the phrase, this is not a phrase therapists can use, but you will hear lay people go, oh, they're acting like a jerk. You've heard that.
Yep.
We all have heard that before. Oh, they're acting like a jerk. Well, for a therapist using this phrase, we would go, well, we've got to make sense of their jerkness, meaning what you just said. Hang on. What's really going on? Now, that will be a phrase that's going on in my mind as it relates to this phrase. Like, what's really going on?
Yeah.
Like, that's the outward behavior that you hear and see, but inwardly, what's really going on? And when you've got a couple in the room, the other one's response, I mean, we got a lot going on when we've got a couple in the room.
Yes.
And so what makes this make sense really takes, from me, a lot of judgment out of the room when you're asking the question, really, what's going on? So it really helps to maintain curiosity the whole time. And I know it gets complicated a little bit, but actually it's very simple to maintain curiosity, to keep asking questions, getting to the bottom of things. It's an issue of the heart. When you're curious, it leads to the next question. That means somebody cares. It's not a cut and dry. You just keep being curious.
And can I say, being curious, that's a great word. It makes you a better therapist. It makes you a better friend. It makes you a better spouse. It makes you a better parent if you can be curious about the people you're dealing with. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make as human beings is I assume I know why you're doing that, or I assume I know exactly what you mean by that. Another phrase that I want to throw out that I can remember you saying from a long time ago, always stuck with me, is what is said is rarely what is heard.
Oh, that's a big one.
Meaning that I say things and I think we have an understanding of what those words mean and what the definition, but very often there's something else going on here and I'm not communicating what I think I'm communicating to you.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
And
it just goes hand in hand with this one.
Oh, yeah. True. It goes hand in hand with this one. Very true. You can walk out the door thinking one thing and get home. And it's like you've been mad all day to come home and find out, oh, that's not at all.
Yes.
what I thought.
That is right.
Yeah, because you didn't clarify and weren't curious to find out. It wasn't anything that you thought it was. So.
And Susan, can I say, once again, if you look in the New Testament, Jesus models that so well because in so many cases with people, he will let them tell him his story, tell him their story.
Yes.
And out of that story, Jesus will begin pulling things and then using that in how he interacts with them next. And I'm thinking Jesus probably already knew their story, but to let them tell their story, to be seen and be heard, and then that affects how he relates to them and what he does next.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is beautiful.
Yeah, because you're right. Of course, he already knew their story.
Right.
But he wants to engage anyway.
Right.
And wants them to engage back.
Well, and I think also that shows every story is important to God. And if it's important to God, it needs to be important to me. Right. If I truly want to love people, if I truly want to understand people, your story needs to matter to me.
So true. So true. That reminds me, and I go back to the story, which I go to a lot, but Bartimaeus, when Bartimaeus comes up to God and Bartimaeus is asking for his sight. But before he does, Jesus comes to Bartimaeus and says, what can I do for you? What would you have me do for you? That was the question. What would you have me do for you? Which is a rhetorical question. He knows he's blind. He knows what he wants from God, but God wants to hear it from Bartimaeus.
Mm-hmm.
So he wants us to participate in the request as well, sometimes
That's
too.
right.
So it's a beautiful story.
Yes.
It's a beautiful story because Bartimaeus knew who to go to, knew who could heal him, yet it's a rhetorical question. God still wanted to hear from Bartimaeus. It's just beautiful.
Absolutely. And, Susan, and kind of what we're talking about right now, there's a whole field out there in counseling of narrative therapy. And Dan Allender has done a lot of work with that. And Dan goes back and talks about everybody's story is important. And even for you as a person to understand your own story is helping things to make sense. Because once again, as human beings, often I don't understand, why do I feel the way I do? Or why do I react the way I do? And knowing my own story and paying attention to my own story begins to make that make sense. And once again, that doesn't make it right or wrong. That doesn't make it logical, but it does help me to begin to have the pieces to change that if I want to change that. Just that understanding.
That's good. Yeah. Story is so powerful.
Very powerful.
Story is so powerful. And your story is your story.
That's right.
And that is the most powerful story of all.
Mm-hmm.
So that is so true. And that helps, to your point, make everything make sense. When you're comfortable in your own skin, know your own story, everything. Well, that's part of our job, is helping people feel comfortable in their own skin and make sense of that.
Well, and that's what I want our listeners to be hearing here is your story is very important. And just because you're not famous or no one's asking you about your story, it's still very important. And it's important that you understand your story. And part of even coming to understand who you are as the person that God created as a new creature in Christ is to understand my story. How did I get here? And I think just part of being a healthy, engaged person is really being willing to look at my story, the good parts, the painful parts, the embarrassing parts, and begin to look for the meanings in that.
Mm-hmm. And purpose.
Absolutely.
That's why I'm here.
Absolutely.
Yes, and engage. Because as I always say, our relationships that we are in or that we have are as healthy as we are individually.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to become healthy individuals and make sense of our own story.
That's right. That's right.
If you will.
And can I say this too, Susan? Another thing that's very valuable in therapy is when people come in, and sometimes they're already coming in with a story, right? And the story would be easily to judge as really terrible or really bad. You and I deal a lot with people who've had affairs, right? And they come in and that is their story. And all too often people come in and they've already judged their story and they expect you to judge their story. But, one of the things I say to my people is, we can talk about the right or wrongness later, but we just need to put this thing on the table and try to understand it first. And that makes a lot of people, especially Christians, uncomfortable. It's like, well, but we know that's wrong. Yeah, yes, we do know that's wrong. But as soon as you start quickly judging something and putting it in that box, you lose your ability to have any insight into why did I do that? Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing to do, because in the end, we do need to judge things well as right or wrong, good and bad. And yet, that's not the place you necessarily want to start, right? Is you want to understand, why did it make sense for me? Why did that seem like a good idea at the time to do that? Mm-hmm. And if we can, once again, be curious with our own stories, there is a lot to learn and understand there.
A lot to learn about who we are.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
And invite God in that process is the key. Yes. Because he can reveal in a way that only he can, very gently. Very gently reveal. There's so much left to talk about. If you'll stay, we can jump into another podcast if you're willing.
You bet.
That'd be great, because time flies when you're having fun. So hang on, listeners, for the next podcast. We're so glad you joined us. Please stay with us for the next one. Thank you. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tangible Truth Podcast, part of the KLRC Podcast Network.